Hello, welcome to today. We're going to first look over our homework from chapter 6, and then we are going to read 7 and 8 and a few questions before we look at the homework for chapter 7 and 8. So let's start with chapter 6. All right, so you needed to put these in order of events, and I'm just going to go through and tell us the correct order that they should have been in. The first one should have been, down here towards the middle, the best days on a farm are during early summer. So this should have been number 1. Number 2 was back up towards the top, and it was the goose heard her gosling's weak voices before they hatched. Then number 3 should have been the first gosling poked its gray-green head out of the shell. Then number 4 was when Charlotte congratulated the goose on the birth of her goslings. Next was way down here. So we found out that out of the 8 eggs, only 7 had hatched. And then the gander warned Templeton to stay away from the goslings. And Templeton is wondering what happened to the eggs. And all the way back up top, Templeton took the 8th egg to his tunnel. And number 9, or second to last one, was Charlotte warning about the regular stink bomb. And the very last one was when Mr. Zuckerman saw the goslings when he came with Wilbur's supper. So we know at the end of that chapter that Templeton took the egg, and we also know that, remember how the goose was thinking what an innocent little pig Wilbur is, so we're thinking that. Let's find chapter 7 in our books. It's on page 48. It's a VII, so 5, 6, 7, and it's called Bad News. Bad News. All right. Wilbur liked Charlotte better and better each day. Her campaign against insects seemed sensible and useful. Hardly anybody around the farm had a good word to say for a fly. Flies spent their time pestering others. The cows hated them. The horses detested them. The sheep loathed them. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were always complaining about them and putting up with screens. Wilbur admired the way Charlotte managed. He was particularly glad that she always put her victim to sleep before eating it. "It's real thoughtful of you to do that, Charlotte," he said. "Yes," she replied in her sweet musical voice. "I always give them an anesthetic so they don't feel pain. It's a little service I throw in." As the days went by, Wilbur grew and grew. He ate 3 big meals a day. He spent long hours lying on his side, half asleep, dreaming pleasant dreams. He enjoyed good health, and he gained a lot of weight. One afternoon, when Fern was sitting on her stool, the oldest sheep walked into the barn and stopped to pay a call on Wilbur. "Hello," she said. "Seems to me you're putting on weight." "Yes, I guess I am," replied Wilbur. "At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining." "Just the same, I don't envy you," said the old sheep. "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you?" "No," said Wilbur. "Well, I don't like to spread bad news," said the sheep, "but they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you, that's why." "They're going to what?" screamed Wilbur. Fern grew rigid on her stool. "Kill you. Turn you into smoked bacon and ham," continued the old sheep. "Almost all young pigs get murdered by the farmer as soon as the real cold weather sets in. There's a regular conspiracy around here to kill you at Christmas time. Everybody's in on the plot. Lurvy, Zuckerman, even John Arabelle." "Mr. Arabelle?" sobbed Wilbur. "Fern's father?" "Certainly. When a pig is to be butchered, everybody helps. I'm an old sheep, and I see the same thing, same old business, year after year. Arabelle arrives with his .22, shoots the— "Stop!" screamed Wilbur. "I don't want to die. Somebody save me! Somebody save me!" Fern was just about to jump up when a voice was heard. "Be quiet, Wilbur," said Charlotte, who had been listening to this awful conversation. I can't be quiet, screamed Wilbur, racing up and down. I don't want to be killed. I don't want to die. Is it true what the old sheep says, Charlotte? Is it true they're going to kill me when the cold weather comes? Well, said the spider, plucking thoughtfully at her web, the old sheep has been around the barn a long time. She has seen many a spring pig come and go. If she says they plan to kill you, I'm sure it's true. It's also the dirtiest trick I've ever heard of. What people don't think of. Wilbur burst into tears. I don't want to die, he moaned. I want to stay alive right here in my comfortable manure pile with all my friends. I want to breathe the beautiful air and lie in the beautiful sun. You're certainly making some beautiful noise, snapped the old sheep. I don't want to die, screamed Wilbur, throwing himself to the ground. You shall not die, said Charlotte briskly. What? Really? Cried Wilbur. Who's going to save me? I am, said Charlotte. How? Asked Wilbur. That remains to be seen. But I'm going to save you, and I want you to quiet down immediately. You're carrying on in a childish way. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics. Chapter 8, last chapter for today. A talk at home. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Arable and Fern were sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings had hatched? Asked Fern. How many? Asked Mr. Arable. 7, replied Fern. There were 8, but one egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Templeton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away. The goose did what? Asked Mrs. Arable, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried look. Told Templeton she didn't want the egg anymore, repeated Fern. Who is Templeton? Asked Mrs. Arable. He's the rat, replied Fern. None of us like him much. Who's us? Asked Mr. Arable. Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me. Charlotte? Said Mrs. Arable. Who's Charlotte? She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever. What does she look like? Asked Mrs. Arable. Well, said Fern thoughtfully. She has 8 legs. All spiders do, I guess. Charlotte is a spider? Asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her. Does he really? Said Mrs. Arable rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte, said Fern. Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched? I haven't the faintest idea, said Mr. Arable. Tell us. Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, I am sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it. Don't you think that was a pleasant thing for her to say? Yes, I do, said Mrs. Arable. And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school. And tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon you can tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you? I like it there, replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she had left the room, Mrs. Arable spoke in a low voice to her husband. I worry about Fern, she said. Did you hear the way she rambled on about the animals, pretending that they talked? Mr. Arable chuckled. Maybe they do talk, he said. I've sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think they hear all sorts of things. Just the same, I do worry about her, replied Mrs. Arable. I think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her the next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she's acting about that pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk. Mr. Arable grinned. Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's, he said. Ooh. All right, so let's think about those 2 chapters. Why was Wilbur freaking out so much in chapter 7? Yeah, he found out the terrible bad news that he was gonna die. Can you blame him? Right? Like, if you found out, you'd be like, no, this isn't gonna happen. No, this can't happen. So, I think he is kind of right. I think he might have been a little over the top, but it seems to be the way with Wilbur, right? Like, he cries at everything. He's very sensitive. So, let's take a look at chapter 8. Mr. and Mrs. Arabelle. And we haven't talked with them in a long time, right? Since, like, the beginning of the book. So Evie White brings them back now. And how are they feeling about Fern's new relationships? They're not really too fond of it. At least one parent isn't, right? I'm not going to tell you who. Can you tell me? Mrs. Arabelle, so the mom, right, is like, something's not right because people don't do this stuff. And Mr. Arabelle's like, she is fine. She's just got a good imagination. It's all fine. But Mrs. Arabelle wants to have a doctor come, Dr. Dorian. Who do you think that's like? Is it like a doctor like my chest hurts? No, probably not. More like a mind doctor, right? Like a psychologist or a counselor to talk to her and see like, are you okay? Because Mom thinks you're a little cuckoo in the head. So we'll have to see what happens next time. Let's take a look at our homework. Chapter 7 and 8 I put together, okay? So name, and then chapter 7's on page 2. Why was Charlotte's Web useful to everyone? At the beginning of the chapter, we talked about that. You might need to reread the first few paragraphs to figure out why. And tell me, what was the problem in chapter 7? And how did Wilbur react to the bad news? And how did Charlotte react to the bad news? And then chapter 8's just got 3 questions. Why is Mrs. Arabelle concerned about Fern? Make sure you're answering it with Mrs. And this one is, why is Mr. Arabelle not concerned? And for the last one, Fern tells her mother about everything that was going on at the farm, right? Which ones did she tell her about? Pick all of them that apply. I'll give you a hint. There's at least one that is not true, but there might be more. Okay? All right, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, get to work on chapter 7 and 8.